Welcome to 3 Count Commentaries. So today we're going to talk about Jimmy Van and Sean Ross Sapp having a discussion about the state of AEW and whether things can turn around. Jimmy Van is the guy who actually owns Fightful. I know that Sean Ross Sapp is the face of the brand. He might be a co-owner, but Jimmy Van is the guy who actually, I think he's the founder and the owner. So we want to listen to this because he compares current AEW, in a sense, to early 90s WWF. And there's some context, some very, very important context missing. I didn't even get to Sean Ross Sapp's part of this thing. It's about 5 minutes, but we'll get there. In any event, I want to cue this thing up and play Jimmy Van's argument, and then I'll respond to it. Let's see what we got here.
And ratings on the AEW side, there's been so much discourse, Sean, especially with these online trolls that do it for engagement. So much discourse about ticket sales and ratings and pay-per-view buys and everything being down. But I think the biggest issue AEW has is the perception issue more than anything else. I think that when they came around 5 years ago, they were the hot new company. They had a roster that was predominantly made up of wrestlers that were not known on the worldwide television stage. It was considered like a fresh new thing. They're not considered the cool company right now.
Sure. Okay. Now, I agree with this, actually. This part of his statement, I actually agree with. I am of the opinion, and this needs to be said, that AEW was actually worse in 2019 and 2020 than it is now. That it was objectively worse. Now, you think I'm lying, right? Because you may say, well, they were getting a lot of views and the buildings were big and they were full. Joey Janela was wrestling on those shows. You know, the best friends. They had, what was that the man woman thing, not Nyla Rose, but Nyla Rose is on those shows too. But it was another one. Sonny Kiss was wrestling on those shows. Michael Nakazawa, Brandon Cutler was all over those shows. In 2019, 2020, Big Swole was all over those shows. And those shows were kicking NXT in the balls every single week. And NXT was throwing literally everything they had at them. Finn Balor, Adam Cole, Undisputed Era, Riddle, throwing everything they had at. And people were just so excited to have something other than WWE to watch that they were watching AEW Dynamite, and the show was terrible. It was just different. It was just different. AEW didn't actually get, I think, actually decent until 2 years later, 2021. I think 2021 to 2023 was probably the best part of AEW. That's when they started getting better talent. This is when you stop seeing so much of the Sonny Kiss and the Michael Nakazawas. And, they had a huge influx of talent because WWE released a bunch of people. So you had Malachi Black and you had Miro. And you had Adam Cole. You had Punk came in around that time. Then Danielson came in around that time. And even though Cody was on his way out, they were trying to do something in 2021 where it seemed like, okay, they're actually trying to change the roster. But 2019, 2020 AEW was absolutely the shits. It was the shits. And seeing people, especially very popular podcasters, pretend that it wasn't is quite embarrassing. Especially since a lot of them are now on this side of the fence saying that AEW sucks. It's like, well, it's never been that good. Right? You were just riding the wave of it being, oh, I was just so happy to have something else to watch. And that was the perception. The perception is it's not WWE, so we don't have to hold it to any standard. You can have the AEW botches account, right? Remember, that thing used to actually exist. It doesn't even exist anymore. They have harassed that guy for like 2 or 3 years straight. And that was during the 2020 to 2022 era of AEW botches. This guy was just getting harassed because he was pointing out what we all were seeing literally every week. Terrible matches, tons of botches. Even the people in the crowd would get disappointed when a guy botched a spot. And they harassed that dude. And now everybody's like, AEW sucks, bro. It's terrible then. It was bad then. You wanted to be on that side of the fence. That's fine, whatever. As long as you came around, don't care. You just came around late. But the perception issue is correct. AEW could do no wrong in 2019 and 2020 and to a degree in 2021. It wasn't until the brawl out situation that people became open and honest about critiquing AEW. And then it's gotten substantially a little bit more brutal as the weeks went on. And then, of course, they started to be a little bit more brutal on the shows. First, it was just being brutal on Tony. Then it was, okay, now we can actually critique the shows and say that the shows suck. It took a while to get here, but we're here now, you know? So the energy of the show has changed. The perception around the show has changed. The new car smell is gone. People are now have cleaned off their rose-colored glasses. They're not looking at the product for what it is. And look, they're still doing a lot of the same stuff today that they were doing back then. 20-minute matches between guys. Well, probably not even 20 minutes, but 20-minute matches between guys where you know who's going to win. First, it was Kenny Omega and Joey Janela. Now it's Will Ospreay and Brian Cage. You know, it's the same shit. Same shit. Same shit they complain about now, they were okay with 4 years ago. The perception has changed mostly. So I agree with them on that. This next argument I think he's about to make, though, is where I probably going to not agree with him so much.
And I don't think the perception is the same. And I've seen people, and again, it's always the trolls saying, oh, they're never going to come back from this. They're dying, whatever. All I got to do is point to early 90s WWE. For anybody that wasn't a fan of WWE in the early 90s, WWE was in serious trouble in the early 90s in terms of popularity, in terms of finances. Vince McMahon was pulling out characters. You remember Sean the Goon? A guy who's supposed to be a hockey player. T.L. Hopper was supposed to be a dirty plumber. Isaac Yankem was Kane before Kane when he was a dentist. Who was Jim Neidhart with a mask on? Mantor was a guy that came to the ring in a bullhead. They really struggled in the early 90s, but here's the thing.
All right, so let's talk about this part before he moves on to his next part. Creatively, WWF was in the toilet. I think that began in around 1991, actually. Because 91, WrestleMania did not do so well. It was supposed to be in a stadium, ended up being in a different venue because he couldn't sell enough tickets, and there was a bomb scare and all that kind of stuff. Now, the Meltzer sites will tell you it was tickets. That was all it was. But it was actually both. I did some research on this channel. I did some research about the issue. There was some fear of large mass events, and they were nearly going to cancel the Super Bowl that year. Okay, they actually considered canceling the Super Bowl because of the Gulf War. All right, and WWE was playing off of the Gulf War, which of course turned a lot of people off. But it was both. They couldn't sell enough tickets, and there was an issue with the Gulf War. You know, large groups of people while you're at war, because you become a target at that point. So 91 is when the skid kind of began. This is kind of when, you know, people were getting kind of tired of Hulkamania. 93, Hulkamania is gone. You know, now it's time for the new generation era. Okay. At this time, there was a mass of all the guys from the 80s and 90s. Well, not all of them. A lot of them were gone. Hogan was gone by September of 93. Savage was on commentary. DiBiase was either retired or on the verge of retirement. Mr. Perfect was either on the verge of retirement or doing managerial stuff or wrestling every once in a while. I know he had a serious back injury in the early 90s, so he wasn't going as much. Warrior was gone. Jake the Snake Roberts was gone. Andre the Giant was gone. You know, a lot of the people from the era of Hulkamania were gone. And a lot of those fans who had grew up with Hulk Hogan, now they were growing out of the Hulkamania era. But so that was the creative problem. You know, that's talent, that's creative, that's that part. The biggest issue was Vince was on trial for steroids. That was the big issue right there. Is Vince was being investigated and was on trial for steroids. He was accused of rape. There was all sorts of behind the scenes stuff going on that AEW, they can't use that as an excuse right now. Tony Khan hasn't been accused of rape. He ain't been sued. He ain't been investigated by the federal government. He doesn't have a talent that people are kind of tired of. Well, he kind of does, but we'll get to that in a second. It's a completely different ball game when you compare 92, 93, 94, 95 WWF to current AEW. They didn't have the money to go after a lot of talent because they were spending so much money on legal fees to keep Vince out of jail. I mean, there was all kinds of stuff going on. And it was a rebuilding of getting rid of, I hate to put it this way, but getting rid of the older guys, bringing in some of the newer guys and getting the newer guys ingratiated to the audience. Because a lot of the guys they brought in 95 ended up being stars in 97. Steve Austin, Mankind, Triple H, Hunter Hearst Helmsley. A lot of those guys, they weren't much when Vince brought them in initially, but it took some time to get them over. Even Goldust came in 95. I think it was late 95. So it took some time to rebuild. But they had on-screen and off-screen problems. These are issues Tony Khan don't have to deal with. So I don't like this comparison. I don't think this comparison is fair. You could have picked other times in WWE history where the on-screen product suffered and the company still had plenty of money, but they just was doing stupid shit on TV. 2019 was probably the best idea. I think somebody said 2017 to 2019, which you could have just picked most of the 2010s. Hell, even part of the 2000s, like from 2008 to maybe 2016. That's a good almost 10 years of stuff that's just been in a memory hole. And for me, I watched all of it. I watched it as it happened. I watched every Raw, SmackDown, pay-per-view, and I don't remember most of that stuff because it was just pointless shit happening. But they occasionally would crawl out of these funks and they would do well and then they probably slip back into it. That would be probably a better comparison. Is that WWE's business is cyclical. 95 and 94 and 93, that's when it was at its absolute worst. And that was because Vince was on trial for steroids and he'd been accused of rape and a bunch of other stuff was going on. And that, of course, made the on-screen stuff suffer. Because, a lot of the older talent were leaving. And I think Andre passed away. I don't remember off the top of my head what year that was. I think it was 93. But this is what he's comparing it to. Like, you can't compare it to the worst time. I can't compare it to the worst time. There are other times where, they were just in a creative funk and business wasn't doing that well. And that was actually pretty recent. So, I get what he's trying to do, but I'm not gonna let you throw AEW that much bail. No way. No way. Ugh, what happened?
And Michaels, and they had Razor Ramon, and they had The Undertaker. They had the solid nucleus, and eventually things turned around. They got the Mr. McMahon character with Stone Cold Steve Austin, which took off. They had D-Generation X. They had The Rock. AEW has a strong nucleus too.
All right, let's pause it right here too. Let's talk about this. WWE strong nucleus. Now, it's true. There were some guys that the WWF started to build in the early 90s that were still there when the company got pulled out of its funk. Shawn, Brett, Undertaker was like the three major guys. And then, of course, they brought in Scott Hall in 93. And Diesel came in 93 too, if I remember correctly. Diesel got his big push in 94. He was champion for most of 95. So they added some players, specifically 2 major ones. But they did build around guys who had been there for a while. But they actually did stuff with those guys to make them interesting. All right. In 1990, Bret Hart was still in a tag team for the most part. The Hart Foundation. Shawn Michaels was still in a tag team at that time. By 92, both of them were single stars. When you look at AEW's nucleus, the Kenny Omegas, the Young Bucks, these guys came in as the stars of the show. You built the entire show around them. They are still in place. Hangman Page was one of the stars of the show. He's still there. They said that Darby Allin and Sammy Guevara and MJF are pillars of the product. Those guys are still there. If you look at Hulkamania, Hulk Hogan was gone in 93, which is the worst part of WWE history that he tells you about. Hogan was mostly gone by this time. Savage was gone. Warrior was gone. Andre was gone. I just went through this. Piper had retired actually in like 1988 or something like that and was wrestling sporadically at this time. AEW still has all the guys that they built the entire company around. They are still there. It's not... Okay. So, you talk about AEW's nucleus. This is an important piece, but again, it's not really a fair comparison. Vince McMahon had just lost the biggest wrestling star in the history of the industry. Not named Bruno Sammartino or Jim Londos or whatever, okay? You're going to nitpick and argue about that, fine. But you can't replace Hulk Hogan overnight. AEW has not lost at Hulk Hogan. They lost CM Punk, who came in, 3 years after the company had already been established, was only there for like 18 months, and then was gone. He had a very short run there. It wasn't that long. That's not the same thing. It's not the same thing. All right. So AEW's nucleus is still intact. The difference is the creative. WWE leaned into the guys that they had. AEW, they have new guys, which is good. Swerve is, people like him. Will Ospreay, people like him. But I'm not sure if the creative is strong enough to get people over who've been there for a little while and who they're not interested in anymore. I mean, they just tried it with Private Party, right? They tried to boost some guys. People didn't want to care about Private Party because they didn't do anything with them. So it's not always a talent issue. Well, this might be a creative issue.
Yeah. They got Kenny Omega and they got Will Ospreay and they got Mercedes and Tony Storm. They have a good nucleus. They need the stars to align like WWE did. And so I don't think saying they're dying is fair. They need something to hit the way that WWE did. But the difference is WWE in the early 90s didn't have to deal with this online toxicity the way that AEW does. And that's
online toxicity. That's, oh my God. Vince McMahon is being called a rapist in the newspapers. Okay? The federal government has gotten his entire life under a microscope. You're right. I wish it was just online trolls, but it wasn't. Okay? Get out of here with these online trolls. That shit is not affecting nothing. Most of these people who are supposedly trolls, they were fans a few years ago. You have people who, again, this is so ridiculous. I wish it was just online trolls. And then also, of course, the newsletter guys hated Vince from the moment he bought the company until today. Even today. They still hate him. So 40 years of dislike and them looking for reasons to not like him and him giving them reasons to not like him. But oh my God, my online trolls. Get bent. Get out of here with this shit.
The main difference. So what do you think about the current state of AEW right now?
Improving for sure.
Wrong.
Gotta move on from the heavy old people thing. Like, I mean, heavy. Listen, Hurt Business or Hurt Syndicate are sort of exempt from that. They are talent that people want to see.
But they should be baby faces.
They are baby faces.
Are they baby faces?
They are.
Is this really an argument? It's not time for this argument, okay? There's not the time. It's not the time. Let Sap make his point.
Basically baby faces now. That is a major reason why I believe they were moved away from the Swerve thing.
Okay.
Because they were getting over as baby faces. The Jeff Jarrett thing in small doses could be good. But it's heavy. It takes time on Dynamite. We don't need it. Jericho has been largely relegated to Collision. Okay.
And Ring of Honor.
And Ring of Honor. But, like, come on. And, like, that. It's not that that there's old people in the show. It's that they're all over the show. And
yes.
I was surprised. I didn't get this far into this video initially. Okay. But he's making it's a solid point. It's a solid point. But the bigger problem isn't that the people are old on the show. Because WWE has a bunch of old motherfuckers too. The issue is what they are doing with these older people. And by older, how old are we talking about? This is the reverse R. Kelly. How old are we talking about? Because Moxley is old. He's been around. He's been on TV since 2012, 2011. He's been a television wrestler for 10 years. I mean, is that old? I mean, I don't know how actually physically old his body is, but he's been on television for a long time. Sasha Banks has been on television a long time. If you're going to bring people in that have been on TV for a long time, you should be doing something unique with them. You should be doing something different with them. Edge, been on TV since, God damn it, 1997? What are you doing different with him? Now, this, of course, matters because during the dark ages of what they were talking about earlier, what Jimmy Van was talking about earlier, Vince brought back Bob Backlund. Now, Bob Backlund was the WWE champion from 1978 to 1983 or something like that. That was before I was even born. But all I knew was Crazy Bob Backlund on TV because when he came back, he was doing something different. He was doing something that even the people who were watching him when they were kids in the 1970s was like, this is not the Bob Backlund I remember. It's different. The fact that Bob Backlund was old didn't really even cross my mind because the fact that he was old played into his character. That's actually what they used. And then also he was the only one. He was the only one. That's just being fair. I don't think there was anybody else that had been wrestling from the 70s that was on the roster at the same time. But that's my point is creative. You do something different with these old folks. And then also make them color their hair so they won't look so old. And that's another issue is when you go to perception, if you see somebody who's like receding hairline or balding or whatever, looking all raggedy, and you find out they're 21, you're like, oh my God, what kind of life you living? Because I used to know people like that, And, I know people like a guy who had 3 babies at 18 from 3 different girls. He was gray at 22. I've known guys that have been going bald since they were 21. But, perception is reality. If you look bald, you look 40. These guys are 50, but they look young. Physically, that they're old because they've been around for a long time. But you see all this gray hair, like Edge. Come on. Jarrett. Jesus Christ, Colonel. A lot of these guys don't just They aren't just old, they also look old. And that's problematic too. Because Hogan was old when he was in WCW. Hogan was old when he came back. Bret Hart was fucking old. When he was the WWE champion, he was almost 40. Bret Hart was old in WCW, but he didn't look old. Sometimes people are... Rey Mysterio is old. You can't tell how he looks if he wears a mask. Undertaker was old in 2007. 2008, when he was having some of his best matches, he was old. He didn't actually start looking old until about 2017. It's not about the physical age of the performer. A lot of times it is how you present them. Again, a creative issue. If you presented Edge differently, people wouldn't mind that he was there. If you presented Jarrett differently, people wouldn't mind that he was there. Like he gave an exemption for Bobby Lashley, right? Why would you give an exemption to Bobby Lashley when Lashley is older than Moxley? You know, like, and he's a rookie. And he's about as old as Edge is. I think all three of the members of the Hurt Business are in their mid-40s. Like, the difference is you're seeing these guys in a different context. You got the Hurt Business a little bit in the WWE. It got cut short, but people like the faction, they like the group. And so you reformed it for AEW, and people are like that. They don't care how old these guys are. And Lashley doesn't look old. He's never had a beard or a mustache or anything like that, so you can't tell if he's gray. And he's always had a baldy, so you can't tell if he's gray. So you don't know how old he is. Unless you've been watching him on TV your entire life or something. That's the magic of being different. It's creative and look, presentation. AEW and WWE, because they letting CM Punk go out there gray all over the place. Kevin Owens too. A bunch of other guys too, but them two specifically. When you let people go out there and they look old, and you know they're old, it becomes a problem.
It's the opposite of what Adam Copeland, who again performs pretty well,
right?
But constantly will reference things from 30 years ago, and it's like, come on, man! Like, you are aiming for a bit of a younger audience, which WWE has more of a stranglehold on now. Like they're doing
always, by the way. And then also let's talk about this for a second. I don't want to go down this road too far, but it wasn't that long ago, probably like 2 years ago, where AEW was building storylines from Ring of Honor events from 15 years prior, right? Like Eddie Kingston and CM Punk standing in the ring talking about some old Ring of Honor heat that they had from like 2002 or some shit. And it's like, this was 20 years ago. It worked because two performers, they made it work. So again, it's a creative issue. Edge can talk about stuff that happened 30 years ago, but if it doesn't click with the audience today, if he can't get it to mean something, then it doesn't matter. You could talk about old stuff. You can bring up old stuff. But you have to make it palatable for young people today. And WWE is always going to be geared more towards the youth, which is what I've been saying for a long time. That's the key to their success. AEW wants to appeal to the guys who are watching Ring of Honor, who have now moved on to New Japan, and now they've scrapped New Japan. They moved on to Deadlock Pro Wrestling, which is their new fad. They're going to squeeze the juice out of that company too. But this is what they do. This is why everybody's been talking about the AEW neckbeards. These people shouldn't be upset that Edge is talking about old stuff. The entire company has been built on old shit. Old Ring of Honor guys. Oh, he was such a star in this small building in Pennsylvania back in 2003. Roderick Strong and shit, right? Now all of a sudden, you can't talk about old stuff. Get bent.
Really well with that. But it sort of loses the plot on what made AEW special and what made those people want to join AEW and get on the cool train then. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I also think, and we've kind of talked about this before, with all due respect to Jeff Jarrett, I really like Jeff Jarrett. I don't know him personally. Seems like a good guy. It was really bad timing for AEW to do this story when everybody knew that John Cena's doing his farewell tour.
Maybe that's why they did it. I think the Colonel saw something working and was like, I need to get me some of that. That's the thing that a lot of people don't realize, is that old wrestlers are so savvy. They're so shrewd. Oh my God. This is how old guys end up running all these companies, right? That's how all the old guys ended up running TNA. This is how all the old guys ended up running WCW, right? They have a history of success. And they know how to modify what they do, even if it means stealing from somebody younger to keep themselves going. You know, Hulk Hogan used Hall and Nash, who are, just a few years younger than he is, to keep himself relevant. Randy Savage jumped on that train too. Everybody knows what they're doing. They see, this is where the momentum is running. And if you're an older wrestler and you still want to wrestle, you jump on it. This is why so many older wrestlers started gravitating towards AEW. They saw, this company's got momentum. Let me jump on that. Even if it's only around for 2 or 3 years, I'm going to cash in and get out. It's the same thing they did to TNA. You got to be smart enough and savvy enough as an owner to know that's what they're doing. But older wrestlers are super smart. They work the promoter like a mark, because sometimes the promoter is a mark.
Yeah.
They couldn't have picked a worse time to decide, you know what? One of the biggest stars in the history of the business is doing his farewell tour on the other show. Let's go and have our guy, who, with all due respect to Jeff Jarrett, is nowhere close to John Cena in terms of star power. Let's have him do the same thing. The timing was really, really bad on it. But I agree with you. Bobby Lashley, I think the world of him. Shelton Benjamin, Adam Copeland, even Jeff Jarrett. But you're right. They're all over the show. And a guy like MJF, who I think in terms of an all-around performer is probably the biggest star they got, it feels like he's just there doing the story. He should be the guy, and it feels like he's just there.
Again, creative issue. It's not an age issue. MJF is half the age of Edge. And he's out of juice, pretty much. They've let him say and do whatever he wanted for 4 years. They milked him pretty heavy in 2023 and 2024. It ran him pretty hard. He ended up getting injured. But in doing so, they let him do whatever he wants. They played into some of his worst instincts. And he burnt himself out. Now, he's young enough that he can pivot. He can always make some tweaks to the character, tweak his look, all that kind of stuff. He already put the hair plugs in, so he's not balding anymore, which is again, very smart move. Cosmetic change. But it's not an age issue. It's a creative issue. And MJF's creative has been stagnant since he returned. The plan was just to get him on TV, not to actually get him on TV and do something. Similar to what they're doing right now with Kenny Omega. As time of recording, Kenny Omega is in a tag team with Will Ospreay, which is fine. But they're feuding with the Don Callis family, which is not fine. Because it involves Brian Cage and Lance Archer. And Lance Archer has been around since 2002. He sucks. Why is he still being paid? I don't know.
But we'll see where things go. They got Omega back. And I
he should pay you to be there, by the way.
Really think highly of Omega. And
Lance Archer sucks really bad. Like, really bad.
They got Ospreay and Tony Storm. I thought she did a great job on Collision.
Look, Tony Storm is great. Lance Archer sucks. You got to start making some cuts. That's another thing that you need to start actively getting rid of people. And Lance Archer needs to be near the top of that list. Top 5 guys that should be fired from AEW.
They've got the nucleus like I talked about. They need stars to align in terms of the right story and the right characters just hitting. On the AEW side.
All right, so the whole stars aligning things, no, you have to force the stars to align. That's how it works. You have to put a plan in place so that the stars will align. It's not just, well, we're just gonna roll the dice and see what comes up. No, this is what you have creative and production meetings for. You sit down and you plan for who's going to be your stars in the future. And if a guy like Darby Allin, who you're building around, starts to fuck off, then you erase him and you go to somebody else. You have to plan. It's a creative issue. That's the whole thing we got here. It's creative. Fix your creative. I'll talk to you guys later.